The idea arrived quietly, the way life-changing moments often do, without warning and without drama, slipping into the room as if it belonged there all along. The four of them were gathered in a rented cabin in Vermont, a place chosen for peace, for fresh air, for a break from work and noise. But peace has a way of inviting honesty, and honesty can be dangerous. Sarah sat beside her husband Daniel on a worn couch, her legs tucked under her, listening more than speaking. She had learned that habit over the years. Lily leaned against Mark, her laughter easy, her eyes bright in a way Sarah hadn't felt in herself for a long time. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, steady and calm, and the fire popped softly, filling the pauses between their words. They talked about jobs, about stress, about how time seemed to move faster each year. Then Mark, half smiling, half tired, said it without thinking too much. "What if we tried something completely different this week, just to shake things up?" Everyone looked at him. He waved his hand, explaining quickly, joking at first, saying how couples sometimes lose themselves, how routines blur people together until they forget who they are outside of them. Sarah felt her chest tighten as he kept talking, her mind already racing ahead. Lily laughed and asked what he meant, and Mark shrugged, saying something like, "What if we swapped partners for the week? Lived together, talked. No romance, nothing weird, just perspective." The room went still. Daniel gave a small laugh that didn't reach his eyes, asking if Mark had been drinking too fast. But Sarah didn't laugh. She stared at the floor, at the shadow of the fire dancing there, feeling a strange mix of fear and relief. It sounded reckless, yet honest. Lily stopped smiling, her fingers tightening around her glass. No one spoke for a long moment, and in that silence, old thoughts surfaced. Sarah thought about the space that had grown between her and Daniel, how conversations had become lists, how love still existed but felt buried under schedules and expectations. Daniel thought about responsibility, about how hard he worked to keep things stable, and how rarely he was thanked for it. Lily thought about how Mark made her laugh but never asked what she feared. Mark thought about how he loved Lily but felt unseen in his own home. None of them said these things out loud, but they hovered in the air, heavy and real. Sarah finally spoke, her voice calm but firm, saying it might help them understand each other better, that it was only a week, that they were all adults. Daniel looked at her, surprised by her certainty, and something flickered between them. Not anger, not love, but distance. Lily hesitated, biting her lip, then nodded slowly, saying, "Maybe it would be healthy. Maybe it would remind them why they chose each other in the first place." Mark exhaled as if he hadn't expected agreement, and suddenly the idea was no longer a joke, but a plan. They set simple rules quickly, almost desperately. No touching, no secrets, honesty above all else. They spoke fast, afraid that if they slowed down, doubt would stop them. Sarah packed her bag later that night in silence, folding clothes she had worn around Daniel for years, feeling like she was stepping out of a life she knew and into something uncertain. Daniel watched her from the doorway, wanting to say something meaningful, but unable to find the words. Lily hugged Mark longer than usual, her arms tight, her face pressed into his shoulder as if memorizing him. Mark kissed her hair and joked about it being an experiment, but his smile faded the moment she turned away. Morning came too quickly. Cars were loaded, doors closed, and suddenly Sarah was sitting in Mark's passenger seat, the road stretching ahead, unfamiliar and full of questions she wasn't ready to answer. She stared out the window, heart pounding, wondering what this week would reveal about her marriage, about herself, about the quiet ache she had learned to live with. Behind them, Daniel drove with Lily beside him, both staring forward, both thinking the same thing, but saying nothing. None of them knew yet that this simple decision, made in a moment of honesty and restlessness, was already changing them, pulling loose truths they had carefully tucked away, setting them on paths that would not easily lead back to where they started. The first day passed with polite smiles and careful distance. But by the second morning, the quiet truths began to surface without effort. Sarah woke early in Mark's house, the unfamiliar stillness wrapping around her, and for the first time in years, she did not feel rushed. Mark was already in the kitchen, moving calmly, making coffee without checking his phone, asking how she slept as if the answer mattered. They talked easily, not about big dreams or deep regrets yet, but about small things, favorite books, places they missed, moments that shaped them before love complicated life. Sarah found herself laughing more than she expected, surprised by how natural it felt to be heard without explaining herself. Duh. As the hours passed, the walls between them thinned, not because of attraction, but because honesty felt safe. Mark admitted he often felt invisible in his own relationship. That being dependable had turned him into background noise, and Sarah understood that feeling too well. She spoke about how marriage had slowly replaced romance with routine, how she loved Daniel but missed being chosen with intention. The words came fast, as if they had been waiting. Meanwhile, across town, Lily and Daniel settled into an uneasy rhythm. Daniel kept things organized, meals planned, schedules clear, and Lily noticed how much effort he put into keeping life stable. Yet there was a heaviness about him, a quiet pressure that followed him from room to room. Over dinner, Lily asked when he last did something just for himself, and Daniel hesitated, realizing he couldn't remember. He spoke about responsibility, about providing, about how love meant endurance, and Lily listened, feeling both admiration and sadness. She realized he loved deeply, but expressed it through duty rather than presence, and that kind of love could still leave someone feeling alone. The days moved quickly, filled with long walks, shared meals, and conversations that stretched late into the night. Sarah noticed how Mark listened without interrupting, how he remembered details, how he laughed softly instead of loudly, and it stirred something gentle but unsettling inside her. She missed Daniel, yet she also felt lighter here, less guarded, and that contrast frightened her. Mark sensed it too, and kept his distance, careful not to cross lines, but emotional closeness doesn't ask permission. Across the way, Lily began to see Daniel more clearly, not as Sarah's husband, but as a man worn down by expectations. She saw how he avoided conflict, how he swallowed his feelings to keep peace, and she wondered how long he had been doing that. One evening, during a quiet drive, Daniel admitted he feared becoming irrelevant, that he worried Sarah no longer needed him, and Lily felt a sudden ache for both of them. The experiment was no longer about curiosity. It was holding up a mirror none of them could look away from. Sarah lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how easily she talked here, how heavy things felt back home, and whether love should feel like effort or ease. Mark lay awake too, aware of the growing bond, questioning whether connection always meant desire or if it simply meant being understood. Lily sat by the window in Daniel's house, realizing comfort without emotional closeness could quietly drain a relationship. And Daniel sat in the dark, understanding too late that love needs more than reliability to survive. They all knew something had shifted. No promises were broken, no rules crossed, but emotional doors had opened, and once open, they could not be closed again. The week that was meant to be harmless was becoming a turning point, revealing not what they wanted from someone else, but what they had been missing within themselves. And each of them felt the weight of what would come next, knowing that whatever happened after this, their lives would never return to the simplicity they once knew. By the middle of the week, the experiment had grown heavier than anyone expected, carrying weight in small gestures, unspoken thoughts, and quiet moments that felt bigger than they should. Sarah found herself standing on Mark's porch one evening, the sky glowing pink and orange, the cool air brushing her face. She realized how much she had missed, noticing small details in life. Mark stood beside her, hands loose at his sides, watching her watch the horizon. Neither spoke at first because silence had become comfortable, more revealing than words. Sarah could feel how much he truly listened, how he noticed when she laughed, when she sighed, when something made her uneasy. She remembered similar moments with Daniel, but realized those days were rarer now, swallowed by routines and responsibilities. The closeness was strange, almost electric, but innocent, filled with understanding instead of desire. She wanted to tell him everything, but feared speaking might break the fragile balance. Mark finally spoke softly about his own life, admitting fears and regrets, how he sometimes felt invisible in his own home, how he longed for connection beyond surface conversation. Sarah nodded, feeling her chest tighten, understanding that this honesty was rare for both of them. Meanwhile, across town, Lily packed her bag in Daniel's apartment, her hands shaking slightly as she folded clothes into neat piles. Daniel watched her, the air between them thick with unspoken truths. He noticed the way she hesitated, the way her expression flickered with sadness and care. He realized how much he had taken for granted, how love could become routine without anyone noticing. She had laughed at his jokes, helped organize his life, but he saw now that comfort was not the same as connection. When she looked at him, there was admiration, warmth, but also a question he couldn't answer. He felt the shift in their dynamic, the fragile vulnerability that came from weeks of living closely without pretense, and it shook him. That night, both couples sat down for dinner, a mix of laughter and tension hanging in the air, because everyone knew the week was nearing its end, and endings always carried questions. They avoided the obvious, spoke lightly, but the pauses were long and loaded. Every glance and smile waited with thought. Sarah caught Daniel's eye for a moment and saw something she hadn't noticed before. A flicker of recognition, of awareness that she was more than routine to him, more than background noise. Daniel saw Sarah differently, too, seeing her not as someone to manage or maintain, but as a person with needs, feelings, and dreams he had ignored. Lily watched Mark across the table, noticing how he softened when she laughed, how he listened without judgment, how he valued her opinions in a way that surprised her. Mark realized he cared for her beyond the ease of companionship, that seeing her fully was different from living alongside her. The emotional closeness was undeniable, but no one crossed boundaries, which only made the tension stronger. As the final days approached, each of them wrestled with feelings that weren't supposed to exist. Sarah felt a longing she couldn't define, not romantic, but profound, a need to be seen and understood. Mark felt a responsibility to respect her space, yet he was drawn to her openness, the rare honesty she shared. Lily felt admiration and tenderness for Daniel, mixed with sadness for what had been lost in routine. And Daniel felt the ache of recognition, realizing that love required more than stability, that it required attention, presence, and care he had sometimes withheld. On the last night, all four sat together, the conversation flowing easily, yet the tension lingered like a shadow behind laughter. They spoke of dreams, regrets, hopes, and failures, the kind of conversation they had never allowed themselves before. Every smile and sigh carried meaning, every pause a question. No one admitted their deepest fears, but they all felt them. When it was time to part, the air was heavy, emotions unspoken but intense. Hugs were longer, glances lingered, hands brushed accidentally, and each of them understood that the week had changed something fundamental. The swap was supposed to be harmless, a way to see life from another angle, but it had become a mirror, reflecting the truths they had avoided. Sarah left Mark's house feeling lighter, but also uncertain, realizing how much she wanted to rebuild her marriage with awareness and care. Mark closed the door behind her, aware that connection didn't always mean romance, but that intimacy could exist in unexpected forms. Lily walked out of Daniel's apartment carrying both warmth and a quiet ache, understanding that love required more than familiarity, that presence mattered more than perfection. Daniel stood in the doorway long after she left, thinking about what had been lost and what could still be repaired. By the end of the week, the experiment was over, but its effects lingered, invisible yet powerful. No promises were made, no lines crossed, yet every one of them felt the undeniable shift in their hearts, the understanding that relationships could be more than routine, that love required honesty, tension, and courage, and that seeing someone fully could be as transformative as any grand gesture. The week had ended, but the discoveries would stay with them forever, leaving them changed, thoughtful, and quietly desperate to make choices that mattered before it was too late. The final day arrived with a strange mix of relief and tension, as if the air itself held its breath, waiting to see what they would do with the truths the week had revealed. Sarah and Daniel sat together in their living room, unpacking bags in silence at first, the quiet loaded with everything they hadn't said. The memories of Sarah laughing with Mark, the way he had listened, the conversations that had stirred long-buried thoughts lingered in her mind. And Daniel felt it too, the weight of the week, pressing on him, showing him what he had overlooked. They began talking carefully at first about small things, the practicalities of returning home, of routines, but soon their words deepened. They spoke about distance, the quiet drift that had settled between them over the years, and the ways they had taken each other for granted. Sarah admitted how she had missed feeling chosen, truly noticed, and Daniel confessed how easy it had been to assume love needed no proof, that stability was enough. The conversation was raw, yet gentle, each of them listening instead of reacting, understanding instead of defending. Across town, Lily and Mark faced their own reflections, their drive home quiet, each thinking about what they had discovered. Lily realized that comfort alone could never sustain a relationship, that admiration without attention or presence left emptiness, and Mark understood that seeing someone clearly, hearing them fully, required courage and honesty. They spoke later that evening, their conversation both tender and revealing, acknowledging the moments of connection without confusing them for romance, recognizing how much they had learned about love, patience, and understanding. When all four gathered again briefly, the tension was palpable, but different, softer, more aware. They shared small laughter, exchanged knowing glances, and each carried unspoken truths, realizing that the swap had given them something far more valuable than adventure: clarity. Sarah and Daniel committed to seeing each other with fresh eyes, not assuming they already knew everything, promising small acts of attention, honest conversations, and efforts to rebuild closeness. Lily and Mark promised themselves the same: to approach love with awareness, to notice what mattered, to care deeply without taking comfort for granted. No grand gestures were made, no dramatic declarations, only a quiet, determined choice to act differently, to nurture what had been nearly forgotten. As the sun set, Sarah looked at Daniel and felt a renewed tenderness, a gentle hope that the years ahead could be filled with intentional love, with connection and curiosity. Daniel returned her gaze with equal quiet understanding that the heart required more than stability, that love had to be lived daily, not just preserved. Lily smiled at Mark, a soft, knowing smile carrying gratitude for insight and friendship, and Mark nodded, feeling a mix of admiration and respect that would guide him moving forward. The week had ended, but its lessons lingered, subtle yet undeniable, shaping how each of them would approach love and life. They had learned that seeing someone fully, listening without judgment, and choosing each day to engage meaningfully could transform ordinary relationships into extraordinary ones. It wasn't about swapping partners or seeking something new. It was about choosing to truly notice the one you already had, understanding that intimacy was less about physical closeness and more about emotional presence. As they went their separate ways, each carried a quiet hope, a readiness to act differently, to love more fully, and to cherish what they had with intention. The experiment had started as curiosity, almost a game, but it ended as revelation, leaving them with a deeper awareness of themselves and each other. A gentle but firm understanding that love was a choice every day, in every small moment. And in that realization, each of them felt a subtle, lasting change, a promise to honor the lessons learned, to keep seeing, listening, and caring, knowing that this choice, simple yet profound, could indeed change everything.